Eleanor and Graham Finch had built their lives, quite literally, into the fabric of the Rocky Mountains. For 45 years, their rustic, yet remarkably sturdy, log cabin had stood sentinel on a sprawling, secluded plateau bordering the vast, untamed expanse of Yellowstone National Park in Montana. Now, in their early 70s, their bodies carried the quiet aches of a lifetime lived close to the earth. Graham's hands gnarled from carpentry and wilderness survival. Eleanor's back stooped from years of tending her sprawling herb garden and meticulously documenting the flora and fauna around their home. They were retired park naturalists, their minds still sharp, brimming with encyclopedic knowledge of every plant, every animal, every geological nuance of their beloved territory. Their gray hair crowned faces etched with the wisdom of sun, wind, and countless quiet observations. Their life together was a well-worn, comfortable rhythm. Mornings began with the brewing of strong coffee as the first light filtered through the pines, followed by Graham's methodical checks of their solar panels and water system, while Eleanor transcribed her latest wildlife observations into worn leather-bound journals. Days were spent hiking familiar trails, mending fences, gathering firewood, or simply sitting on their wide porch, binoculars in hand, watching the drama of the wilderness unfold. Their shared passions, their deep respect for nature, had always been the bedrock of their marriage, the silent language between them. Yet, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor had begun to ripple through their well-ordered world. Eleanor, despite her sharp mind, found herself sometimes losing words mid-sentence, forgetting the names of common birds, or misplacing her cherished field guides. Graham, ever watchful, pretended not to notice at first, attributing it to age. But the instances became more frequent, more pronounced. A quiet, terrifying fear began to take root in their hearts, the creeping shadow of memory loss. The thought of leaving their home, of losing their independence, of Eleanor's vibrant mind fading, was a silent, unacknowledged sorrow that often hung heavy in the air between them, threatening to unravel the very peace they had cultivated. They spoke of it in hushed, fragmented sentences, dancing around the edges of a truth too painful to fully confront. Their wilderness, once a boundless source of joy, now felt like a daunting, isolated fortress, emphasizing their vulnerability. It was during a particularly long, golden autumn, stretched unnaturally by unseasonable warmth, that the first signs of the unusual began. Eleanor was on the porch, sketching a lone, soaring golden eagle, when a massive, familiar shadow moved at the very edge of their property line. It was Old One Ear, a grizzly sow known throughout the region, instantly recognizable by a triangular notch missing from her left ear, a memento from a long-ago territorial dispute. Old One Ear was a legend, a survivor, perhaps the oldest grizzly in their valley, a symbol of the wild's enduring strength. She rarely ventured this close to human habitation, preferring the higher, more remote slopes. But now, she was not only close, she was pacing. Her enormous body, usually a picture of confident power, was tense, her movements agitated. She walked a tight, repetitive circuit along the tree line that bordered their property, her massive head low, sniffing the ground with unusual intensity. Her famous, calm demeanor was replaced by a restless, almost frantic energy. She would stop abruptly, huff, then pace again, sometimes swiping a paw at the earth in frustration. And she was alone. Utterly alone. Old One Ear, the legendary matriarch, should have cubs by her side at this time of year, or at least be preparing her den. Her solitude, combined with her agitated behavior, sent a shiver of unease down Eleanor's spine. "Graham," she called, her voice tight with concern. Graham emerged, his tools clattering softly. He followed Eleanor's pointing finger, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the grizzled matriarch. He knew her history, her wisdom, her fierce protectiveness. "Something's wrong," he murmured, his voice low, reflecting Eleanor's unease. "She's not just foraging." They watched for hours, binoculars trained on the pacing bear, observing every twitch, every anxious sniff. Old One Ear eventually vanished into the deep forest as dusk fell, leaving behind a lingering sense of mystery and growing worry. Over the next few days, Old One Ear became a persistent, unsettling presence. She would appear at odd times, often at dawn or dusk, always alone, always pacing the same stretch of forest edge near the cabin. Sometimes she would pause, staring intently towards a specific point in their property, a long-abandoned, partially collapsed old mine shaft hidden amongst a cluster of thick aspens, its entrance now little more than a dark, debris-filled crevice. She would let out low, guttural moans, sounds of distress, of longing, unlike any bare vocalization they had ever heard from her. Her agitation grew, her fur seemed less cared for, her eyes held a frantic wildness. It was clear this magnificent, ancient bear was in deep, profound trouble. Graham and Eleanor found themselves consumed by the mystery. Their quiet anxieties about Eleanor's memory began to recede, pushed to the background by this immediate, perplexing puzzle. "Why here, Graham?" Eleanor mused one evening, poring over old topographical maps. "Why is she so agitated near the old shaft?" The mine shaft had been abandoned nearly a century ago, deemed too unstable and dangerous. It was a place neither they, nor any wildlife, typically ventured. Days turned into a week. Old One Ear's desperate pacing continued. One afternoon, Graham was out checking their perimeter fence when he heard it, a faint, high-pitched whimpering, almost like a lost puppy, coming from the direction of the old mine shaft. It was quickly muffled, then repeated, fainter still. He froze, his blood running cold. It was the sound of a bear cub. A very young bear cub. He returned to the cabin, his face pale, his usual stoicism shattered. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "there's a cub." "Or cubs?" "They're in the shaft." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Old One Ear's strange behavior, her desperate pacing, her guttural moans, she wasn't just agitated. She was trying to get to her trapped young. The deep pit of sorrow they carried for Eleanor's fading memory was suddenly eclipsed by a sharp, immediate fear for the lives of these vulnerable creatures. They knew the risks. Interfering with a grizzly, especially a mother separated from her cubs, was almost suicidal. Their own age and Eleanor's condition made it even more perilous. They called the park rangers, the biologists they knew, but the line was dead. A recent storm had severed the phone lines, their only link to the outside world. They were isolated, truly alone with this desperate problem. "We can't just leave them, Graham," Eleanor said, her voice firm, her eyes clear and resolute, all traces of her recent confusion gone, replaced by a fierce determination. "She's asking for help, in her own way. And those cubs, they won't last long in there." Graham looked at her, seeing the fire rekindled in her gaze, the sharp intellect of the naturalist, the unwavering compassion of the woman he loved. This was not a choice, it was a calling. They began to formulate a plan, a quiet, strategic intervention that drew upon their decades of wilderness knowledge. Direct contact was out of the question. They had to assess the situation, then lure the cubs out, or find a way for the mother to get them, all without the mother bear perceiving them as a threat. Their lives, once focused on quiet self-preservation, now revolved entirely around the desperate plight of the trapped cubs. Graham, with Eleanor guiding him from a safe distance through binoculars, meticulously approached the old mine shaft. He moved with the slow, deliberate care of a seasoned tracker, observing the ground for fresh prints, scent marking, any sign of old One Ear. The entrance to the shaft was indeed partially collapsed, a jumble of rotting timbers and loose rock. He could hear faint whimpering from deep within. It was terrifyingly unstable. He returned to the cabin, his face grim. "There are at least two," he reported to Eleanor. "And the collapse looks recent. She probably denied inside, and it gave way. Or they wandered in and she can't get them out." Their first attempt was diversion. They used a drone, one Graham had purchased years ago for aerial mapping, to drop tempting pieces of fresh salmon near the shaft, hoping to draw old One Ear away long enough to get a clearer look. The bear was cautious, but her hunger and her overwhelming distress eventually led her to investigate the offerings. While she was distracted, Eleanor, with surprising agility for her age, used a long-handled camera to peer into the shaft, capturing shaky images of two tiny, huddled cubs, their eyes wide with fear, too deep within the crevice to reach. The photographs confirmed their vulnerability, steeling their resolve. Over the next few days, their routine shifted entirely. Graham spent hours studying the shaft, assessing its stability, meticulously planning how to clear a safe path. He fashioned long poles with hooks from sturdy branches, hoping to snag something, anything, that might help the cubs climb. Eleanor, meanwhile, became the bait master, preparing fragrant, high-calorie offerings, fish oil, honey, and smoked salmon, placing them strategically to keep old One Ear fed and distracted, yet always at a safe distance from their work zone. They worked in shifts, one watching the bear through binoculars, the other working, their movements precise, their communication silent, through hand signals and knowing glances. The physical exertion was immense, pushing their aging bodies to their limits. Graham's old injuries flared, his back a constant ache. Eleanor's memory lapses, while less frequent under the intense focus, would occasionally re-emerge, making her momentarily forget a critical detail of their plan, causing a flash of fear. But the sight of old One Ear's persistent distress, her mournful moans echoing through the valley, and the faint, desperate whimpers of the cubs spurred them on. This mission had given them a profound, undeniable purpose, a shared challenge that drew them closer, making their own struggles seem less daunting, less defining. Their marriage, already strong, deepened with this shared, desperate endeavor. One frigid morning, after days of careful, dangerous work clearing away small rocks and timbers, Graham managed to dislodge a large, rotted beam that had been jamming the shaft entrance. The sound was a loud crack, echoing through the still air. Old One Ear, who had been resting a few hundred yards away, shot to her feet, letting out a terrifying roar, her fur bristling. She charged, a thunderous black blur across the clearing. Graham froze, knowing he had pushed his luck too far. Eleanor, from the porch, screamed his name. But just as the bear reached the edge of the clearing, her momentum halted. She swung her head towards the shaft entrance, now slightly wider, a sliver of light visible within. A faint, muffled whimpering sounded from inside, closer now. The sound arrested her. Her focus shifted from the human threat to the sound of her trapped young. Graham stood motionless, barely breathing, as old One Ear approached the shaft, sniffing, whimpering softly, her agitation now tempered by a desperate hope. She tried to insert her paw, but the opening was still too small for her massive body. Jed and Eleanor worked through the long day, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer will to succeed. They crafted a makeshift ramp, using sturdy planks of salvaged wood, carefully angled into the widened shaft opening, hoping the cubs could climb it. They smeared the ramp with honey and fish oil, an irresistible scent. They then retreated to their cabin, their hearts pounding, their bodies aching, and waited. The next dawn was cold, crisp, and utterly silent. No pacing. No roars. No whimpers. A terrifying quiet. Graham and Eleanor emerged from the cabin, their faces drawn with exhaustion and dread. They cautiously approached the mine shaft. The entrance was clear. The makeshift ramp was still there. But the honey and fish oil were gone, licked clean. And there were no cubs. No sign of them anywhere. Their hearts plummeted. Had their efforts been in vain? Had the cubs succumbed? They searched the immediate area, their disappointment a heavy cloak. Then, Eleanor, ever the keen observer, noticed something near a patch of fresh snow not far from the shaft. Two distinct, small sets of bear cub tracks, leading away from the shaft, fresh and lively. And beside them, a single, enormous grizzly paw print, Old One Ear's unmistakable stride. The tracks led towards the deep, ancient forest, towards the higher slopes that were Old One Ear's true domain. They were gone. And they were together. A wave of profound relief, a warmth unlike any winter fire, washed over them. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down Eleanor's face, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy, of a raw, aching beauty. Graham wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair, his own eyes wet, shaking with the release of weeks of tension. They had done it. They had saved them. The cabin felt different in the days that followed. The underlying anxieties about Eleanor's memory, though still present, seemed less formidable. They had faced a life-and-death struggle, pushed their limits, and emerged victorious. The act of selfless intervention had rekindled a fire within them, reminding them of their strength, their shared purpose. Eleanor found her memory lapses becoming less frequent, her focus sharpened by the immense relief and the validation of their efforts. Graham, watching her, saw the light return to her eyes, the vibrancy to her spirit. They began to talk, truly talk, about Eleanor's condition, about their fears, but now with a quiet resolve, a renewed sense of partnership. They would face this challenge together, just as they had faced the wilderness. Weeks turned into months, then a full year. The seasons turned, bringing the familiar rhythms of the wilderness. They never saw Old One Ear or her specific cubs again, though they saw other bears, healthy and thriving. But every so often, Jedediah would find something near their cabin, a small, subtle sign that spoke volumes. A perfectly intact, large grizzly claw left on their porch step. A single, enormous, fresh fish laid carefully at the edge of their cleared property line, untouched. And one crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned to fiery gold, they found a small, meticulously arranged pile of the season's ripest huckleberries on their well-worn porch swing, a treasure too carefully placed to be accidental, a wild, unspoken gesture of profound gratitude. Their cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, now resonated with a deeper hum of connection, a vibrant pulse that echoed the living heart of the wild. Their hands, once focused only on their own survival, had reached out, however subtly and at great risk, to protect a fragile life, and in doing so, had discovered a profound healing within themselves. The desperate pacing of an old grizzly, the faint whimpers of her trapped cubs, and the risky decision to intervene had not only saved a family of wild bears but had, in turn, breathed new life, new purpose, and a renewed sense of profound peace into the hearts of Eleanor and Graham Finch, forever binding them to the ancient, untamed spirit of their beloved mountains. They were no longer just two aging naturalists, they were guardians of the wild, their lives inextricably linked to the unseen wonders of the vast wilderness. Their legacy, they now knew, would not only be in their journals and observations, but in the thriving bears that roamed their mountains, a silent testament to a remarkable, life-changing bond. The winter that followed the rescue of Ghost's cubs was, by all accounts, one of the harshest in living memory. Snow fell relentlessly, burying the valley under a seemingly impossible white blanket. Temperatures plummeted to 40, sometimes 50, degrees below zero, turning breath to instant crystals and making every outdoor excursion a test of will. Yet, for Eleanor and Graham Finch, the biting cold and the daunting isolation felt strangely less oppressive than in previous years. The profound joy and relief they had experienced watching Ghost and her cubs disappear into the forest, hale and whole, radiated a quiet warmth within them that no blizzard could extinguish. Eleanor's memory, while still a concern, seemed to find moments of remarkable clarity, especially when she spoke of the bears. She recounted details of old One Ear's pacing, the faint whimpers from the shaft, Graham's careful maneuvers, with a precision that astonished them both. It was as if the intense focus and emotional peak of the rescue had forged new pathways in her mind, a stark contrast to the frustrating fogginess she sometimes experienced with everyday tasks. Graham saw it, acknowledged it, and subtly guided conversations towards the natural world, towards their shared triumph, recognizing it as a quiet form of therapy, a balm for her spirit. Their evenings were now often spent poring over old wildlife journals, not just for scientific data, but for stories, for connections, for the deep satisfaction of knowing they had actively participated in the wild's enduring narrative. As the spring of the next year unfolded, vibrant and loud with melting snow and migratory birds, a subtle shift occurred in their guardianship. They still walked their familiar trails, but with a heightened sense of awareness, a quiet vigilance that went beyond mere observation. They spoke less of their territory and more of the valley's well-being, their roles evolving from mere residents to silent, active stewards. Graham, with his carpentry skills, began to fortify old culverts along the river, widening them slightly, knowing they served as vital wildlife crossings, especially for bears moving between feeding grounds. Eleanor, with her encyclopedic botanical knowledge, meticulously cleared invasive species from prime berry patches, ensuring a robust food supply for the summer and autumn for all creatures, bears included. These were acts of quiet devotion, extensions of the compassion they had felt for Ghost's cubs. Then came the gifts. It began innocently enough. One morning, Graham found a perfectly intact, large eagle feather on their porch step, laid precisely on the worn welcome mat, not blown there by the wind. A few weeks later, Eleanor discovered a small pile of freshly picked huckleberries, perfectly ripe and unblemished, placed on the flat, sun-warmed rock where they often left water for passing deer. These weren't random occurrences. The berries were too perfectly arranged, the feather too pristine, too conspicuously placed. They looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them, a shared, incredulous smile. Could it be? Could Ghost, in her ancient wisdom, be offering reciprocal gestures of gratitude? They never spoke of it aloud to anyone, keeping it as their private, miraculous secret, a testament to the profound, unseen intelligence of the wild. The gifts continued, sporadic and always unexpected, throughout that year and the next. A flawlessly shed elk antler, stripped clean by scavengers but left at the base of their favorite observation tree. A pile of smooth, unusually colored river stones, arranged in a small, neat circle near their vegetable garden. Once, after a particularly fierce winter storm had downed several trees blocking their main access path, they returned home days later to find a large, impossibly heavy log, clearly dislodged by immense strength, rolled neatly to the side of their path, creating a clear passage. Graham, inspecting the claw marks on the bark, felt a tremor of awe. The wild was giving back. Their quiet interventions had established an unspoken dialogue, a reciprocal relationship with the ancient, powerful spirits of the forest. Eleanor's memory, while still presenting challenges, had found a new anchor. When confusion would creep in, Graham would simply say, "Remember the bears, Ellie? Remember Ghost and her cubs?" And often, the fog would lift, her eyes would clear, and she would recount the details of the rescue, or describe one of the mysterious gifts, with vivid clarity. It was as if the profound experience had carved a deep, unshakable pathway in her mind, a core memory that grounded her. Their fear of her decline began to lessen, replaced by a deep appreciation for the moments of clarity, and a newfound acceptance of the journey they were on. They realized that living fully in the present, finding joy in unexpected connections, was a more potent antidote to fear than any cure. As the years gently folded into one another, Eleanor and Graham became, in essence, an extension of the wilderness itself. Their gray hairs grew longer, their movements slower, but their senses remained acutely sharp, attuned to the subtle shifts of the ecosystem around them. They learned to read the forest not just as naturalists, but as participants in its intricate dance. They understood the language of the wind in the pines, the subtle changes in the river's song, the unspoken narratives woven into every animal track and every rustle of leaves. They never directly sought out Ghost or her now-grown cubs, respecting their wildness, their need for untamed space. But they knew. They knew Old One Ear still roamed their valley. They occasionally caught glimpses of her from afar, a majestic shadow against a distant ridge, a fleeting movement through the dense trees, her familiar notched ear a beacon of resilience. And sometimes they would see her with new young, a testament to the enduring cycle of life she represented, a direct legacy of their desperate, life-saving intervention. They would watch, binoculars pressed to their eyes, and a quiet, profound joy would settle over them, a deep satisfaction that resonated in their very bones. Their cabin, once a mere dwelling, transformed into a kind of quiet sanctuary, a beacon of harmonious coexistence. Hikers and occasional park rangers who ventured deep enough to find them spoke of a tangible sense of peace that emanated from the Finch's property. They knew the Finches were unusual, hermits in a way, but also figures of deep respect, their knowledge of the local wildlife legendary. Graham would share his observations of the changing bear populations, their migration patterns, their health, offering insights that official studies often missed. Eleanor, though speaking less, would sometimes share her delicate watercolors, now featuring bears in various postures of strength and quiet grace, infused with a depth of understanding that only a true wilderness soul could possess. One late autumn, a particularly cold and early snowstorm trapped a group of inexperienced hikers high on an exposed ridge. The rangers, struggling to reach them through the sudden whiteout, were losing hope. Graham, hearing the crackle of distant radio calls about the emergency on his old two-way, knew the precise, treacherous shortcuts through the blizzard-laden forest, routes known only to a few seasoned locals and, perhaps, the oldest animals. He didn't hesitate. Bundled in layers of wool and fur, With Eleanor's unwavering nod of support, he ventured out into the blinding snow, guided by instincts honed over decades. He led the rescue team through a hidden pass, a treacherous gully that Ghost herself often used for shelter, a path he had meticulously noted in his quiet observations. His intimate knowledge of the terrain, deepened by his understanding of animal movements, proved invaluable. The hikers were found, cold but alive, a testament to the unforeseen benefits of a life lived in communion with the wild. Upon his return, exhausted but resolute, Eleanor met him at the cabin door, her eyes shining with pride and relief. "You are truly a part of this place, Graham," she whispered, her voice clear, her eyes reflecting the vast, snowy landscape outside. "You always were." And in that moment, the last vestiges of their fear for her memory, for their aging, seemed to dissolve. Their lives were not about loss, but about connection. Not about decline, but about profound, enduring purpose. In the final chapters of their lives, Eleanor and Graham found themselves filled with a quiet contentment that transcended the worries of the world. They had faced their personal fears and the raw power of the wilderness, and through an act of shared compassion, they had discovered a wellspring of resilience and meaning. Their cabin, once a retreat, became a testament to a life fully lived, deeply interconnected with the natural world. They became, in their quiet way, legends themselves, their story a whispered tale among the few who knew them. The old couple whose lives had been irrevocably transformed by the desperate plea of a bear, a silent pact forged in the heart of the wild. They lived on, year after year, surrounded by the towering peaks and whispering pines, their hearts full, knowing that in saving a life, they had truly found their own. Their legacy was not just in their journals or their quiet acts, but in the vibrant life that thrived around them. A testament to the boundless and often unseen beauty of mutual respect between humanity and the enduring, ancient spirit of the wild.